All right, good morning, everyone. I realized I coordinated my outfit with the presentation colors, and that wasn't intentional, but I'm super proud of myself. So we're going to start with that. And I am also realizing this is the first time I've been at RETCON. It's been really informative, but I'm also realizing that this is one of very few office sessions that have been talked about. So that kind of brings us to what we're doing here and where I believe that there is potential solutioning in the office market today. I started out as, I've always been in research and strategy. I started out in office, and of course during the pandemic I was like, wow, good thing I broadened my horizons. But I am a true believer in office, and I'm a true believer in bringing people back and engaging them. So with that, 1 billion square feet of direct vacant office space. That's a pretty scary, uncomfortable number. And that does not include another 1 million square feet of sublease space that's also on the market. I am going to stop at the negativity right there. And I am going to try to be more positive throughout the rest of this presentation because that's what we need to get office back and up and running. So there are some great tailwinds that we've seen in 2025. Namely, we saw the most leasing activity in a single year than we have for the past 5 years. We are also seeing less construction activity. So for the first time in tracking since JLL began about probably 15 years ago, we've seen more conversions and demolition activity than actual new space coming online, which is mission critical for an office market recovery. And then lastly, we are seeing the vacancy rate tick down a bit. We're still hovering above that 20% mark, but we've seen that come down significantly. And part of that is a lot of sublease space coming due and turning into direct space, but at the same time also being leased up. So the key pieces in moving from these tailwinds to an actual high momentum recovery are 3 key forces, and that's people, footprint, and technology. So with people, when we talk about people, we're specifically thinking about the way we use office space, the way we use real estate in general, our human behavior and our consumption patterns. So 5 years ago, almost to this day actually, which is kind of scary, I got a text message. It was from my kids' school, and it said, "We are shut for the next 2 weeks." And we all know that that 2 weeks turned into months and years. And it also just wasn't my kids' school. It was our offices. And so we were all stuck at home together. And that was kind of a real reckoning moment for all of us. We all learned that we had to do things differently. And that includes the way we consume space. And that's in our living space, how we consume retail, how we consume office space. And so what led after that led to a period of really high innovation in the way that we executed in our work, our living, our retail. Footprint. How do we get from that change in behavior, that innovation, to what space does for us and how it supports us? So when we think about the changes that we had to make in the way that we work, we had to make dramatic changes in our home life, in our footprint at home. And that's the same thing in the office market today. The footprint that we left in March 2020 is not the footprint that we need today to support our working behaviors. And so when we think about what that looks like and how we shift in that respect, we're thinking about readiness, and we're thinking about changes from an organizational perspective, but also a human perspective. And we need a convergence between our expectations of things like mandates and policies, amenities that people are seeking out, and technology. So as we struggled in the pandemic, at the beginning of the pandemic, and I mean, we struggled really arguably through the whole thing, right? But technology flourished. And once we started to really access that technology, it was at our fingertips. We learned how to function in our space. We learned how to function in our living space with our partners, our spouses, our roommates, our kids, our dogs, our cats, all of the above, and how to work successfully because we leverage that technology. And so the things that I think about today are the technology pieces that I still utilize, right? Like curbside pickup, Amazon Subscribe and Save. And so these are key pieces in thinking about how we gain more momentum into an office market recovery. We need technology that is cost effective and accessible. I think most people in this room at this conference are probably still using Teams or some version of Teams to do their work on a daily basis. So let's talk about people first. What is it going to take to reset the office market? So generally speaking, most people are back into the office about 4 days a week on average. We need more buy-in with that, though, because what that looks like is very different, not only organization to organization, but also within an organization. Different business functions, different teams do different things. They have different mandates. They have exceptions. How people do work is very different role to role. So that 4 days a week might look super productive and engaging for some folks. For other folks, it might not be, depending on the type of work you do. So it doesn't need to be necessarily a cookie cutter approach. And we need more buy-in than just banks and finance and technology leading that back to office. And, around 3/4 of organizations say that they are achieving their attendance goals. But what does that look like? Is that really getting someone back to the office and being fully engaged? Or is it just checking an attendance box? And so that inconsistency is also a culture killer. And so then you start the start of a negative feedback loop. If people are feeling disconnected from their organizational culture, you don't want to go back into the office. What's the point, right? There's a lot of parts to what you do on a daily basis, being productive, your communication with your colleagues, your relationships that really keep you there. So again, it's not that easy. When we think about what influences behavior and how we get people back to the office, there's a whole host of things that are considered both from a personal level and from an organizational level. We're thinking about access to amenities, transportation, ease of commute, enforcement of policies, what happens in the workplace. And so again, we don't necessarily have an office market that has all of these features that everybody wants. And so when you think about 85% of organizations prioritize access to transit where their location is. But how many offices actually have that proximity or that quick access to transit? That's why we're seeing a lot of this bifurcation in the start of an office market recovery, where we all know our trophy Class A offices are outperforming, and then your more commodity Class B and C, and even those lower quality Class A buildings still underperform. So we need an approach to an office market recovery where we can lift up the lower Class A buildings, the commodity B buildings, that help them compete with the likes of a trophy asset, right? And that might not be with transit access, but it could be with amenities, it could be with technology. And there's a couple other obvious headwinds to implementing, right? So when we think about our economic environment today, 2025 was a really tricky year. Lots of geopolitical forces, tons of uncertainty as far as the rate environment, what was happening with immigration and employment. A lot of that uncertainty is certainly trickling into 2026, but when we look at our resilience indices and sentiment and confidence indices, it appears that 2026 is set up to be a more certain year. Part of that is certainly around interest rates and companies having taken a wait and see approach throughout 2025, needing to act now in terms of their space requirements. And that is across the board from office to industrial to retail. So we are seeing more impetus for organizations to get back into the office market, start looking at their leases, expanding, getting people back in. So now is a real strong inflection point for the potential of an office market recovery. And so as we mentioned before, we really need to align how organizations think about this with how people think about this. And that looks like a convergence between preferences and protocols, again, around what those mandates look like, what the building itself physically offers in terms of amenities and technology. And so when we think about that footprint, how does our existing footprint today evolve? So going back to those green shoots that I talked about earlier, leasing activity is broadening. This is a really good sign for the office market. We know that, again, those Class A trophy one Vanderbilts of the world have outperformed, are getting, over $100, over $150 to $200 per square foot. It's pretty impressive. That's not happening in the broad majority of office buildings, however, but we are seeing some of that demand start to trickle down, mostly because organizations, again, have pushed off the decision-making process and really kicked the can for a while. They need to make decisions now. So a couple other pieces are going to be less construction activity, which we've seen, and then the removal of office supply. That's either through conversion or demolition activity. So again, just pointing out where we are today, we had more conversion and demolition activity in 2025 than we did in new deliveries. Not only that, we have another 150 million square feet of conversion activity underway. So these pieces will certainly help chip away at that 1 billion square feet, along with predicted slower but still active job growth in the market, which will help some of that absorption. Our forecast suggests that we're going to see vacancy rates come down around 30 to 50 bips over the next 5 years. But a 15% vacancy rate is still not super attractive to investors and owners. So we need to do more for that. And so in terms of conversion and demolition activity, conversions, for the most part, have been towards multifamily. It's probably the easiest, though still costly and sometimes structurally difficult conversions to do. So what we need to see is a broadening of that conversion activity to other use types. We're starting to see some conversion from offices to industrial, for instance, hotels. And so we really need to see more of that, but also in place for that, as well as demolitions, is we need more municipal and local government support to make that happen. And just anecdotally, we are very active in Canada as well. And in our portfolio, we still have a good amount of office exposure because we are an insurance company, and insurance companies love stability, and offices provided that for a good amount of time. We're actually looking at an office to industrial conversion for one of our properties up in Canada. And, so we're seeing that is a feasible action plan. And so we definitely need more of that in the US as well to happen. As far as demolition activity, that also can be highly costly. So if your asset cannot be converted, demolition is a consideration and rebuilding to highest and best use. But that takes a lot of stakeholders in the process, and you're also going to you're going to lose out on the investments that you probably made in that building over your hold period. So what's left? There is a ton of office stock still left sitting functionally obsolete. What are the pathways that we can take to lift up that office space and make it ready and able to bring back talent, make sure that they're engaged and productive? Technology is key to that. And technology looks like a lot of different things. It could be AI, automation, digital features and enhancements in an office building. And essentially, the crux of this is readiness. We need to involve people, and we need to involve our place or footprint in terms of readiness from a cultural perspective and also operationally. Without those ingredients, you cannot successfully implement technology. So we're paying a lot of attention to what the potential feedback loop here is. And what does readiness look like? So 3 key pillars that we've isolated are infrastructure, implementation, and experience. And these are all relatively simple, and at the end of the day, rely on people to execute simply, cost-effectively, and with operational expertise. Without these pillars, you end up creating, again, back to that negative feedback loop. If you implement technology without guideposts, protocols, processes in place, no one's using technology in the right way to make them productive. And again, that goes for implementation. Knowing your people have the tools they need to be able to execute with the technology, as well as your building. Your building needs to be able to use the technology to the best advantage for your occupants and also the building's operations. And then ultimately, we want to get to experience, that your employees, again, are coming back to the office and actually engaged and productive. We don't want that checkbox feature. And if we think about, a great example is retail, right? So when the e-commerce boom came and people were moving out of the brick and mortar space, what was happening in retail? And by the way, that took a good decade to work through. And that's kind of what we're on track for with office. When the pandemic hit, I looked back at retail and I said, you know what, it's going to be 2030 before we really have any good momentum here. And retail's been able to do that with successfully implementing technology, both by customers walking in the store and leveraging technology for their experience, but also giving retailers information about the consumer behavior, what consumers are looking for when they're coming through a brick and mortar. So at the end of the day, we can have office stock, we can have demand creep up through more employment growth, more absorption, but still, even if we get to a 10% vacancy rate, it doesn't mean that that demand is durable and long-lasting. And so if you're an investor or owner, or even an organization looking to reconcile your footprint, whether it's an expansion or a downsize, you are really thinking about, is this productive? So at the end of the day, this is an operating model reset, both as a person, in our footprint, and in technology. During the pandemic, from start to finish, we had our own operational model resets, right? So when we got that text from our school, our employer, whatever it was, we started communicating. We communicated with our family. We communicated with our friends, our colleagues, to figure out, how do we manage this? We really figured out the cultural piece of it, created a communication infrastructure. Then the next step was, what do I do with my house? How do I work when I have all of this activity? Maybe your spouse or partner is also working, your kids are on Zoom. It's a mess, right? But we figured that out. We made changes within our built environment to respond to the circumstances. And what allowed us to do that, what helped us to do that, was the adoption of technology. So the next frontier for technology enablement, adoption, is the office market. Again, as we see here at RETCON, so much of the conversation is around multifamily. There's been conversation about retail. I was in a presentation yesterday about industrial assets using more technology enablement. Office is the pretty quick win here, right? And if there's any audience in this country, it's this one at RETCON, where someone has a solution here, hopefully multiple people, to make that a cost-effective and highly implementable approach. So thank you. That's it from me.